Hello, and welcome to the MKG podcast, the podcast that helps marketers grow their businesses using the 4 M's, the right means, messaging, media, and measurement. I'm your host, Carrie Gard, and to help me introduce today's guest, I have our CEO, Mike Krass. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Closing out Q2 here for the MKG podcast. Great. I think you kicked us off, and now you get to close us out.
Right on. End of June. The world is continuing to spin. I love it.
2020. What a year.
Yeah.
What a year. Well, thanks for joining me. Very happy to have you. So, in speaking of 2020 and the craziness of everything that's going on, specifically, because we need to talk specifically around the pandemic, events have been pretty much canceled or they've pivoted and gone virtual. Mike, you have a really good ear to the ground with our current clients and what they have going on. What are some of the trends you're seeing and how they're handling events being canceled or going virtual or being pushed or until next year? Like, what are you sort of hearing?
Sure. In no particular order, what I'm hearing and also seeing, things that are actually happening are, number one, there are still a lot of events that they're just picking the whole thing up physically and ripping it over to be a virtual event. This happened, in, I would say probably March, April. This was kind of the popular move, March and April of 2020, where you literally picked it up with your hands and said, this is now an online thing. And you just chucked it on the internet. And then in the past, month or so, in May of 2020, I've seen what I believe everyone knew was going to happen. And then it did happen, which was everyone said, I'm so tired of being on Zoom. I'm so tired of being on WebEx. I'm so tired of, holy cow, it is exhausting. And I, as everyone who listens probably knows, I'm not a medical professional. I've spent 0 days in med school. But I myself have experienced what I think the New Yorker or the Atlantic had a report about Zoom fatigue, right? It's exhausting to consider your background and make sure that things are decorated pretty so you have a nice Zoom background and you're just tired of staring into a camera and not actually talking to a person for all these extra hours in a day. And so that was the first thing. First of all, everyone just ripped them out of the ground and stuffed them on the internet. And then the second thing that happened was everyone started hating virtual events. And it happened pretty fast.
It did. Yeah.
The third thing I think is a lot of cities, at least in the United States, are starting to just call off events for the year, right, for the second half of 2020. And so people are trying to figure out, how can we meet? A thing that I'm very excited to see, I'd say point number 4 in your question, is a lot of people I'm starting to see are doing smaller, more manageable events, even if they have to be done virtually. Instead of trying to cram 18,000 people onto a Zoom webinar or WebEx or whatever, let's make smaller, more intimate events where even though you're staring at a camera, you're connecting with fewer people. It feels a little bit more manageable on a human level, right? It's just a little bit more easy to understand. And I would say that the last thing I've noticed is that events are getting better online, right? When we were in the phase of you just picked it up and chucked it on the internet, we were moving so fast in the business world that people were asking the question, how is this not going to suck? And the people putting it on were like, too bad, we have to do this. Like it's done. I hear you about quality, but this thing is getting picked up and moved online and it's happening right now. And the train has left the station. And now that we have a little bit of time to breathe, we're learning, we as a country and as a planet are learning more about the coronavirus and what it will look like in the short and the long term. People are starting to say, hey, it's kind of a combination of everything I said. I'm tired of crappy events on the internet. I'm tired of attending any events on the internet. So if it's on the internet, it better be good.
Yeah.
It better be someone I want to talk to. It better be interactive. Like yesterday, again, we're in June of 2020. I attended the first webinar that I've been at in a long time. And it was because EO, the professional group I'm a part of, got Mark Cuban on. And he's the guy who sold, broadcast.com to Yahoo Music. He owns the Dallas Mavericks. He owns the American Airlines Center in Dallas, Texas. He's a big venture capital investor. He's got a lot of things going. And that's what it took me to get on the event. I was like, as smart as all these other people are out here, I just literally can't right now. But you put Mark Cuban on.
All right.
I'll probably never meet him in my lifetime. That's an event I'll spend 30 minutes doing. And that's just kind of like the bar has been raised so high, like not even doubled or tripled. It's been increased by a factor of hundreds. And that's how I kind of look at events online now, is like, do I really need to go to this thing or not?
You brought up so many good points, Mike. And actually, our guest today, Heather Seasholtz, we actually cover a lot of this in terms of event planning. She's a strategist at Tully Management Group. And her whole point is that you can't just pick up an in-person event and drop it online. And she talks everywhere from big events to within those big events, having smaller breakout groups, to having small events, to having hybrids of, okay, well, people aren't traveling anymore, so let's do smaller in-person events with a online piece, so people who can't be there can at least show up virtually, and then the people who can be there with social distancing and masks can be there. And so she's got a lot of strategies that she's been working through with her company. She's awesome. She was a finalist in the 2019 Business Event Strategist of the Year award last year. Congrats, Heather. And she's just got a lot to say about where this is going. Events aren't going away, but they have definitely changed, because you're right, Mike. It's the fatigue is here, and to make it worth it, you can't just take an in-person event and drop it online and hope for the best. You got to really make it worth it, make an impact, and make it something people want to be at. So let's take a listen to Heather. Hi, Heather. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
We're good friends, Heather, so I know all about what you do. But for our listeners who don't know you, why don't you just tell us your story? What do you do, and how'd you get there?
Sure. So I am the director of meeting and event management at a company called Tally Management Group. And we are an association management company and a meeting and event planning company. I've been there almost 6 years at this point, and have been in meetings and events for 20 years now. Graduated with a hospitality degree, started in food and beverage, and kind of switched over to be a planner because I didn't feel like smelling like an onion anymore from the kitchen. So decided to go into this crazy, stressful life that has absolutely turned upside down in 2020. So I don't know if that's why I'm having such a crazy year with the 20th anniversary of being a planner. It's like time to switch it up a bit. So
keeping you on your toes. Keeping you on your toes. Yeah. So the event planning you do is generally big in-person events in hotel ballrooms and convention centers.
Yes. We do everything from 10 people up to our largest, which happens every 5 years, which is 50,000 people. So we take over a whole city, and unfortunately that was one of our casualties this year for 2020.
It's not happening at all, or it's going?
Nope, not happening at all. It'll happen again in 2025, unfortunately. Yeah.
Wow.
So not only are we switching to virtual events, we're also learning how to deconstruct events at the same time, which has been something I haven't had to do too often.
And by deconstruct, you mean come out of contracts and those things?
Yeah, exactly. We had event cancellation insurance, so we're learning how to, I've never submitted something that big for event cancellation, getting out of contracts, mitigating cost, refunding 30,000 registrations, things like that, that you just don't think about when you're canceling a program, and then all the work that goes on after you make that decision.
Oh, I want to lay down for you. But for the clients who aren't that big, which sounds like there are many, they've switched gears and they've gone virtual for 2020. Is that right?
Correct. So a lot of our clients that were impacted by COVID-19 in the spring for their spring meetings have either gone to a virtual event. So they've decided to continue forward, still maintain some sort of presence, either a registration, sponsorship, exhibits, content, really decided we had to react, unfortunately, to turn them into a virtual event, or we had clients cancel or postpone till later. So as quickly as everything happened, starting in March, we were in a reaction mode, and now we're starting to become proactive with our fall meetings and kind of taking them either to a virtual setting, a hybrid setting, which we'll go into later, but really kind of starting to think about maybe we shouldn't be meeting face-to-face until there's a vaccine or something to make sure all of our attendees, not just our attendees, but also people in the cities that we're going to are safe.
Right. Yeah, no, that's really important now, more now than ever. I mean, we briefly talked about I have an event in person in September with my team. And if I was to do that in person, what would that look like? And we were talking about, well, each person would have to have their own 6-foot table. You'd have to have splash guards for when people are checking in. And then you would have to make sure, and the list just kept going on. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So it is a mind shift for if you are to do in person. But in terms of virtual, which I think a lot of people have shown is actually very possible. I've actually been watching a lot of events happening virtually, and it's actually been really fun because I wouldn't be able to go to them otherwise. But there's still there's a shift that has to happen between, it's a very different ballgame, right? From being in person to now trying to do this virtually. So walk me through, let's break this down. What's that first mind shift that has to happen in taking it from in-person to virtual?
I think the first mind shift that has to happen is that you can't just take a live event and plop it into a virtual setting. Most in-person meetings are 7 to 8 hours a day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with 2 coffee breaks, a lunch. And so you're really getting a full day of content and the people are in the room. Now you're actually dealing with distraction. You're dealing with email. You're dealing with social media, with kids that are home from school, summer vacations that are coming through. You're still in your work setting. So you've got coworkers, you've got customers or patients coming in and out of your office. So the distractions are huge. So you got to start thinking about what's your audience and who are your audience to know that we probably can't commit 7 to 8 hours sitting in front of a computer. I know I would not want to be sitting in front of my computer. We already do for work, but I could not be listening and paying attention and invested in content for 7 to 8 hours. So you really have to look at it as really a max of 2 hours of segments in order to keep people's attention, and look at it as maybe we theme this, or maybe we do this 2-hour section, or maybe we spread the content out now. So again, the first step is really coming up to what's that audience, and then we can go into the next steps of how to lay out the content for the attendee. But like, you just can't take one and plop it into the other. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way.
Is the audience, it sounds like the audience changes. It's not exactly the same audience that would have showed up in person versus a virtual audience. Have you seen the audiences change?
I think I have seen the audiences change. So I do a lot of meetings for associations, and so we have members and non-members that come to our meetings. And I'd say less than 50% of our members actually come to a live in-person meeting. You can't take the entire industry out while you're having an annual program. Business still needs to continue forward. However, if you go to a virtual meeting, you're now able to reach everybody because you're offering something that they're doing from their home, that they're doing from their business. They're able to participate because it is a smaller chunk of time. They're not having to pay for travel. They're not having to pay for the time out of office. They're not having to pay for childcare.
So accessible.
So the cost comes down exponentially for the attendee, not just the person putting on the virtual event.
Yeah, I feel like I've attended more events this year than ever before, because with 2 small kids at home, I can't just drop everything and head to Vegas for a long weekend anymore. It's not possible. So I've actually been able to attend so much more, and I feel like I've learned and grown. So like, blessing in this insanity. So once you have that audience and knowing that it's maybe a bit bigger, actually my husband just attended an event that was normally in person. It went virtual, so he was able to attend. And his biggest complaint about it, which I thought was so interesting when you're talking to an audience and you're going broader, is that because he'd been doing this event for so long in person and the same people have been showing up, there's been this rapport that's happened and this connection that's happened with all these people. And so they started opening up this event that's been virtual and now to so many more people, and with inside jokes and talking about people like they've known them all this time, and that's not the case anymore. So how do you make it, how do you take it from this intimate setting to a bigger setting where it's more accessible messaging wise?
Absolutely. So a lot of what we do when we do virtual programs is we coach our speakers. So you have to be able to coach them into who's your audience, who's out there, maybe how many are first time attendees, know your stats, because you are getting that from either history or through the registration process. You can ask qualifying questions of who they are, what their interests are. And some of that you can use then to break them into different groups in a virtual setting. Maybe you do, not promoting any system, but Zoom has breakout rooms. Maybe you group those people together so they get to know each other. Maybe you group the veterans together who are looking for one another. And you can make it personal that way. But I think coaching your speakers and reminding yourself of who's there is super important, because you don't want to make somebody feel like they're not included or they're not part of the in club, so to speak. I think the other side of it too is you really only have 60 seconds from the time you start your virtual content to hook somebody in. That's it. They make a decision within the first minute if they're going to stay on or if they're going to be distracted. And so if you don't pull them in right away, and they don't feel like they're seen in a way, quote unquote seen, they won't participate. They need to feel like they're part of it as well. And that's the hard part with virtual events is making groups feel included and making them feel like they're being heard. You would need a really good speaker who's paying attention to that chat that's happening, to the questions that are coming in and saying, Carrie, I see your question. I'll get to you in a minute. And, Carrie from Washington, I see that you've asked this question or that you commented on this. And that's a way to make sure the remote audience is being heard. Even if it's not everybody, at least you're throwing out specific names. So it comes down to that speaker training to really make sure that they're paying attention and they know who's out there.
Wow, that's such a mind shift for speakers, from going up on stage and delivering this talk to now actually having to engage in a way that they've probably never done before.
Probably not. Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make you shift your speakers and who you pick then? I mean, does it completely change your program that drastically?
It can. It doesn't really change the program that drastically. You can still have your heavy hitters if they were supposed to be in person. I think what's interesting about virtual events is that you can actually get bigger and better speakers with virtual events. So we have an aviation client who has wanted this female astronaut forever to speak at their meeting. And she's never been available because she can't travel in person. But now she can give an hour of her time over from her kitchen or her office and be able to participate in that meeting. So it kind of opens up to having, you can recreate your program, but you can still use the same folks you had. You just have to be willing to take the time to educate them and walk them through what it is, how the technology works, where are they going to see the people interacting? Is there somebody on the meeting management side that can help them through some of that and help guide that conversation so they don't get lost along the way?
Yeah, so you almost need two people now, somebody who's actually doing the speaking and somebody who can watch the comments and things come through and sort of mediate. Sounds like another solution if you have a speaker who's not so strong in actually engaging.
We've had it that way. And the other side of it too is we've had keynote addresses that we've pre-recorded. And even though we're putting them out there live at a specific time, that way the speaker can be on the chat and in the Q&A, because it's really hard for them to answer questions and participate while they're speaking.
Yeah.
So, by recording them, then that way they can be active participants with the audience at the same time and answer questions throughout the presentation. So there's a couple ways to mold the content differently. It's all a matter of what's important to the society, what's important to the company, how do they want it to flow? Do they want it to feel really polished or a little more organic? So it really levels the playing field a bit of homemade content and programs versus produced content and programs. It's the wide spectrum now, for sure.
It sounds like it. You really, it feels like sky's the limit almost.
Mm-hmm.
So we have our audience, we have our message. So is it different in terms of getting people to attend? Is it easier? Is it harder? What's sort of the feeling on actually, and can you see engagement on the other side, like, for the people who are getting to show up?
So a friend of mine who works for a large medical association, her annual meetings usually 20 to 25,000 people in April, and they ended up having to cancel it and ended up moving to a virtual program. And they split their virtual program up into 2 different virtual events because they had so much content. What's interesting is out of their 20 to 25,000 attendees, they ended up having 60,000 attendees on their first virtual conference. So they grew by 3 for their program. So people are out there. People want the content. They didn't market any differently. They were able to swing it in the direction of, hey, you can do this from your office. Hey, you don't have to travel to X city. Hey, you don't have to leave home. We'll bring the content to you. These are the events that are live. We're going to record them if you can't join us at that time. But here's all this stuff that we have pre-recorded and is on demand for you whenever you're available to come to it. Now, they did do it for free. So I think they gave the content away.
Oh, wow.
But there was business reasons why they did that. But I think the attendees would have paid no matter what. We have seen with one of my clients, moving them from a live in-person event in June to a virtual event. We've not lost any attendees when we made that change. We've only lost 1 exhibitor. We didn't lose any sponsors. We actually just got a new exhibitor for our event. So I think if you're positioning it with positivity and making it known that you're reaching a larger audience, people can still view this even after what would have been the 3-day event.
That's huge.
Yeah. So now they have a longer engagement with the company, with the attendees. One of our clients is leaving it up for 6 months. Another is leaving it up for 3 months. So the value changes. The whole value proposition changes, not just for the sponsor, the exhibitor, and for the society, but also for the attendee, because they have all this time now to go back and forth and see it. They don't have to consume it, and they don't have to pick what session they want to go to. They can actually see it all at this point, which is huge. And that's pretty much what we're using as marketing. That's the positive message we're using. That's how we're still charging registration fees for a lot of our things, because they now get access to all of it, where they wouldn't have been able to clone themselves and be in 2 different rooms at the same time.
Do you have, for the conferences that you are charging for, do you have different tiers, like only attend the live event at this cost, attend the live event and get all the content afterwards at this cost, swag do you have different tiers, or is it just?
We're doing 1 rate really to give them access to it. We think it would be too hard for us to go in and navigate who gets turned off of what at what time. Mm-hmm. Like this person gets access to this and this person that's in the registration, but also what if that person decides, well, wait a second, I screwed up. I really want to participate in the live, not just have the on demand. So then in the day of the event, that just makes the planning team have to scramble to get them into that information. So we think the value's there. We do have different price points for one of our clients, but that's because it's a global event and we actually did first world, second world, third world country pricing versus the type of virtual event. So we based it on the economic income of the country instead of on the type of event they were getting. Everybody has access to everything no matter what.
That's such a great point, especially if you're going global, thinking about people, making it accessible to people. Wow. Never thought of that. That's so important.
Yeah, that client is really big into making sure that they're getting participation globally, and because their topic is just something that hits every country. And so they've always had a 3-tier registration, no matter when they've had their meeting, live, virtual, or wherever it was. But now with this too, we wanted to make sure that in some third world countries, it's really hard to get content and to get Wi-Fi and to get internet, that we wanted to make sure it was accessible always on their phone. So we're using a meeting app to give them access to the content. So they have that always on their phone. They can always log in via their data or whatever it is they have. But again, really trying to make it as accessible as possible and as easy for them to find. So again, it goes back to that audience of who's your audience, where's your audience, what time zone's your audience in? Will they join us for the live event? Probably not. It's 1 a.m. over there, but
yeah, right.
They're still going to come and watch it at some point.
Wow. That's really cool. In terms of accessibility, I mean, this just opens up so much opportunity from a global standpoint when you no longer have to think about a physical location. That feels like a game changer to me.
So true.
Let's
so
talk.
true. The cost goes away. The cost for the attendee goes away.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, the hotel, especially if you're trying to get from a third world country to the United States or even to Europe, like the cost of that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just like so.
That's okay. Sorry.
Bro, that's so cool. That's so cool. But something you mentioned that I want to come back to is sponsors. And I mean, normally when you go to an event like this and you have sponsors, they get a booth, they get some advertising, they get a lot of physical interaction in space. How are you doing that? You said you still have sponsors. How are you doing that virtually?
So sponsorship, we've done a tiered approach, going back to registration a little bit here. But for sponsors, you really can't do the bag sponsorship and you can't do the pads and pens. I mean, you can still do that. There are ways to do it, but is that what people want? Probably not. At this point, everybody has a meeting bag somewhere. So what we've done with them is we've created tiers of like platinum, gold, silver, bronze. It could be diamonds, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, but at certain amounts. So you spend up to this amount, you get this list of I can't even think of the words, but items that you can have. So maybe that's the sponsorship of the meeting app. Maybe that's 3 email blasts to the participants, couple comp registrations, your logo on this area, an insert in our conference bag or our virtual conference bag. So you can create things like that. So it gives them the tiered approach of you spend this, you get this. So we've created that with a lot of our sponsors at this point. But then we've also do have companies that can do virtual booths. And it can be as simple as just their logo, depending on what your budget is, a logo, a description of their company, and then maybe a link to a Zoom room that they're going to be occupying from this time to this time. So customers can interact with them. Or it can be 3D. I mean, there's companies now doing 3D booths where they can go in and design their booth and make it have a video and people can walk through and see things. So the sky's the limit, or the budget's the limit, I should say, of what you can do. But I think interactions is huge. I think also from what I'm seeing, sponsors just want people to attend the entire time. They're looking for that exposure. So, they want the attendee to be engaged throughout the online event if their logos are up on the screen, if they're sponsoring things, and they want that ability to be in front of them for longer than a 2.5-day meeting. They now have that 3 to 6 month exposure where, hey, if I'm coming in 5 months after the fact, I hadn't been on before, I'm still getting a new person that could possibly click me, look at my stuff, and then I grab their contact information and they can market to them directly. So there's a lot of data that can go back and forth that, when you're at a trade show, how many times have we walked past booths where we're hiding our badge because we don't want our QR code scanned? So you can kind of avoid that now. The customer or the company can get it no matter what at this point.
If they have the right messaging and the right, but it sounds like it's basically media exposure. It's almost like a commercial spot on a TV at this point.
Absolutely. And we're also looking at it as with some of our, like if we do platinum sponsors, we may be giving them a few minutes in the program to give a message. And we're trying to tell them not to make it a commercial. Like we know what the product is, they know who you are. So let's have you talk about why this conference is important, why you're here as a company, why you're supporting it, and the connection that you're looking for between the customer, the attendee, with your organization because of this meeting. So really trying to tie that message together versus, hi, I'm XYZ, I produce ABC, thank you for being here. Like that just doesn't work anymore. People need it needs story.
Yeah. And it's to your point, it has to be, I was just got off of another podcast where we were talking about the simplicity of messaging and the problem you're solving, or, why I think that's so important if you're at an event and why are you there? Why do you think this event is even important, right? Like it's not about you as the brand showing up at this event. It's about the people who are attending the event and how you're supporting them through this journey that they're going on in attending this event. I think that's so important.
Absolutely.
To change the way brands talk about themselves in front of the audience. Yeah,
absolutely. It's that story. You got to make it personal. It just can't, we're a participatory culture now with social media and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and every other. So we're all actively in conversations left, right, side to side. So people want to have that connection of, why are you here? What can you do for me or my business, versus we make this.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Why you, right? Like, even it comes down to the person that's talking, like the person that shows up to even give the insert, so to speak, has to be somebody people can relate to and create that connection with. Like, even personality sort of matters nowadays, especially when you're virtual and you see their face and you're up close and personal now, right? They're not on a stage. It's very intimate.
You're nose to nose. Like, I can see the whites of your eyes now on a Zoom call, and you're usually not. Yeah, we're across the country from one another, but we're actually almost closer than you would be standing in an exhibit hall booth.
Yeah. So it does. It really all matters now. The details, the finite details matter.
Mm-hmm.
So you've done a lot of these events, and there's definitely different aspects, in talking with how events sort of unfold. A lot of time events are really engaging, right? There's breakouts, there's smaller groups. You did mention a little bit of how you could do that using Zoom and those sort of things. But have you, when you're talking about the scale of an event, do you feel like you have had to sort of scale down in terms of how much you can do in person versus what you have to do virtually?
I think you almost have to scale up for the virtual versus scale down, because I think in person it happens organically and naturally around the coffee machine or around the coffee pot. People are out there in the hallway. They find one another. They have the ability to find one another, and I think now we have to figure out ways to create that, which is really hard in a virtual setting. Now, there are tons of platforms out there that are creating that, because that's what meeting managers are missing right now, I think. You have one company that's created just meeting rooms, and you can go in and I can search for your name and find where you are, and that's, and join that group. You've got we mentioned it earlier, you've got the Zoom breakout rooms where you can either pre-assign breakouts and people can go in, based on maybe registration criteria, or you can do it randomly. So you can throw groups together that don't know one another, so they can get to know each other, which I did one not too long ago with a group of hospitality people. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. I had a great time. But it was only 6 or 7 people in each group. You had 4 minutes. It was timed. So that way you really couldn't get bored with one another and the conversation couldn't go stagnant. But it was structured that way. So you had to put the work into how it was going to work with everybody there. I've seen virtual lobbies being put up where people can go in before the session starts. It's just a chat area. People can interact that way before the session begins, and then they're let into the session and they watch it, and you still have the chat room going on in there as well. I've seen, trying to think of something else. Those are probably the big 3 that I've seen, that I think everything else can fall underneath those types of connections. It doesn't even have to be, it can be this way with video, and it can just be with chatting. It really depends, again, on budget and how many systems do you want to bring in, because I've not found, in all honesty, one system that does it all. There just isn't one system that does it all. But you want to make sure that if you're bringing in multiple systems, that they either talk to one another or you make it seamless for the attendees, so that way they don't have to download different apps and they can't, it's easy for them to find the content, because the worst thing you can do is make it difficult for them to get where they want to be and throughout this whole thing.
Yeah, it's got to be seamless.
Yeah,
it's got to go off without a hitch too, which I imagine is really hard when you are making such a big shift from in-person to virtual.
I think that's what, with our June client, we're using a production company, we're using Zoom, we're using another company. So we have 3 companies that we're actually bringing together to do that event, because they each have different strengths. But what we've been able to do is take our meeting app, and inside the meeting app, all 3 of our companies can be linked out from there. So that way they don't have to download anything. They just click on the session. The link is there. It takes them out. And then they can always come back to the meeting app as their central hub. So I think as long as we're figuring out how to bring them back to one point, we can get them out to where we need them to be, just based on URLs, hashtags, whatever that would be for them to get to where they need to go. They still just need to come back to one point. You don't want a scavenger hunt of trying to find where the content is for an attendee to be able to learn, especially if they've paid to be there.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It sounds like a landing page would work too. A gated landing page, login.
Absolutely. A landing page would work. Definitely a meeting app. I think it's funny. A lot of people in our industry are in the meeting side are torn about whether or not they still want to do a meeting app for a virtual meeting versus an in-person meeting. And I don't see why not. It's still a meeting. Your content can still go in there, your bios for your speakers, your headshots, and it can also be used as a networking tool to find participants by name. You can still do your social media through there. So again, it's just that one hub being able to bring everybody to one spot and then, direct them out to wherever you want them to go.
I've never run a meeting, so I'm not totally familiar with all the systems. What are some meeting apps, if anybody wanted to go look them up and see what you're talking about, what are some meeting apps you'd recommend?
So Crowd Compass has one. We use Zarista a lot for our clients. Cadmium CD is one that we use for our clients. There's so many out there. In fact, there's an actual book that's called the App Bible, the Meeting App Bible. I think it's on, I forget how many versions it's been so far, but you could find it, Google it, you could find it, and it'll actually break it down into price points for people. Like there's dozens of free apps and there's dozens from $100 to $500, and then they go up incrementally depending on what functionality you want. But there's hundreds of meeting apps out there for people to buy.
I will drop the link in the show notes below so you can check it out. Oh my goodness, that sounds intense, but also very useful. So let's talk about, so the reason why people host these meetings, right, is to make money, generally, right? I mean, in never having run meetings or events, I always sort of find it baffling on how on earth people actually get, like, they must run the meetings because they make money, but is it through the sponsors? Is it through the registration? And have you seen a shift in the ROI from having it gone from in-person to virtual?
Absolutely. So most of our budgets, you're making money from registration and from sponsor and from exhibits. So there's 3, and grants if it's a medical meeting. So there's really 4 sources of income that could come in. Grants, they're hit or miss depending on the year and what kind of science is happening out there and the funding. Registration, of course, registration fees are going to go down for a virtual event versus an in-person event. You're losing a lot of the overhead that you have to pay for. Expense-wise, virtual events are about a quarter of the cost, about 25% of the cost of doing an in-person event. Just because you're not paying for food and beverage, you're not paying for travel, you're not paying for audio visual in the meeting room, which is huge, sleeping rooms, all the stuff that goes into a meeting, gratuities, just all sorts of things that you could be paying for. You don't have to pay for that now by going virtual. So you have to offset that a bit for your registration revenue too. You can't expect an attendee to pay $900 for 3 live sessions that are 2 hours each. It just isn't going to happen.
Right.
So you have to look at it as to what you think the value of your content is, what you think your attendees will pay. Now we are all learning that now, of whatever that is. Some companies have been doing hybrid and virtual events for quite some time, so they have their price points, but a lot of smaller organizations just haven't started it until now. So they're learning that through that process. Our position so far is we think that anything over 300 is high for what we've seen for our clients for paying for just a registration fee. So we're working through some of that. And it also depends on how long it's going to be up for, how much live content, all that type of stuff. On the sponsor and exhibit side, same thing. We've dropped our rates a bit for that just because they're not getting that guaranteed coffee break in the exhibit hall that we would normally be able to drive traffic into. Yeah, we're going to be able to put their logo and their information in more places online, but I can't force an attendee to click on it either. So that's where the offset is a bit. I think though that when we talked earlier, that you're going to see more registrations coming in. So it's very possible you could still see the same amount of revenue coming in, because if you cut your registration rate by half, you could still be bringing in 2-3 times the number of attendees that you would have had at your live in-person event to your virtual event. And I think the same goes for sponsors and exhibitors. You're now able to reach out to companies that may not have been able to exhibit at your company or at your meeting before. So the smaller organizations that just don't have the staff to send to every trade show, or that may have had budget cuts and don't want to pay for, again, the hotel room, the food and beverage, the travel, the electric, the labor to set up their booth, the booth cost, all that type of stuff goes in. I mean, that's thousands of dollars that they're paying for just to get somebody at your meeting. Now they could pay maybe $1,000 to have a virtual booth, and that's it. They're instead of $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 to actually be there. So I think it's a different value that we have to be able to communicate out to these companies and say, this is why we want you there. This is why it's worth it. You haven't been before, or, we're going to bring you more people, and really just making the sell of why it's important for them to continue their participation in the meeting. So the ROI then is essentially actually going up in most cases? I think the ROI, so I think the revenue and the profit, we'll just use those blanket terms first. I think there's a possibility of at least breaking even for a lot of that, or making more because your expenses so far is much lower. Right. You may not make as much money, but percentage wise, you could be making the same percentage as what you would have been making on a live meeting. So you got to look at it differently. You got to set a different goal for what that budget and what that profit would be. On a return on investment, I think you have to look at it 2 ways, not just on the budget, but you also have to look at that engagement and who we've reached out to and who's participating that would not have been at a live event. Because you are potentially reaching a larger audience. You could be having people that are just driving by your site and engaged in something that they wouldn't have spent a $900 registration fee to attend. So it's a different investment that we look at it from our association point of view. Is we don't want just the dollars and cents, but we also want to look at it as potential membership in the future, which can add to the dollars and cents, engagement, more content, more conversation, more website traffic, more traffic on their social media pages. There's all sorts of things that add to what makes it successful. Yeah, I mean, to your point, the content lives on now. It's just happening in a single day. There might be some recording and sort of cuts of the live event that is used for promotional material later, but to have the full experience documented in a way that you can repurpose it for, months to come is huge. Absolutely. You can create a whole library on your website of content that you can drive to, that maybe it's password protected for the for the registrants for a while, and then in a year you make it public or something like that. Like you're creating your own, we call them an LMS in associations, a learning management system. So you're creating that library and that ability. So for members, it could be a value add of your membership. Now you get access to these recordings, or as another way to continue through, hey, you missed this at our meeting, like you mentioned, a tidbit that you do in a marketing campaign of some sort. So really you're creating and you have all of this information that you can use in any way for your company or your association. It's endless what you can do with content. I want to say last question, but then that might be a lie. So but I am going to start to wrap this up. But one last sort of moment I have here that I think is really important in differentiating an in-person live event versus a virtual event. And we've talked a little bit about engagement, but there's some energy that happens in a room, right? When you have all these people together and they're on, your speakers are on stage and there's lights and there's glitz and there's glam. And I'm assuming that's out the window to some extent, or is it? I mean, is there a way to bring that sort of entertainment and excitement to these virtual events? Are you seeing that? Is that happening, and is it helping? I've seen some of it. I think what's worked really well for some of the events that have gone off is having a professional moderator, almost like a a virtual concierge, so to speak, of somebody that's driving that content. It's like the virtual MC essentially. So somebody that's able to tie everything together that's happening, or this setting the tone for the day of what's going to go on, or providing some of that Q&A that's coming through the internet to the speaker should there be a live Q&A or a live panel discussion of some sort. I think that person can help tie that together. I have seen things where there's musical acts between, if people need a stretch break. I've seen that where there's music happening in between. I've seen virtual yoga happening between sessions just to get people up and stretching, because sitting is the new cancer. So, you want to make sure you're moving around. So I think that you can bring things into it. People are still going to need to have a bio break and get up and walk. And so what do you do to fill that time? Because you don't want them to do it while a session is happening. But if you have some local band or somebody that's streaming in that, a family band that can all be together under the same roof, why not stream them in or something like that to it gives them some visibility and it makes it fun for the attendee. It breaks it up a little bit.
I love that. So I think the beauty of this is not just the accessibility for the attendees, but I also think the accessibility for brands to be able to go do this thing now. You heard it from Heather. It's possible.
It's possible.
It's possible. And you can make it as simple or as complicated as you want. But at the end of the day, content, I feel like, has become the ultimate crux of how brands are going to be successful, and having as much content as possible. And wow, like if you did a 2-day event and you had some really great speakers, that's so much content, and how much you could break that down and how much it could live on. Like, wow. So if you've never thought about doing an event before, and maybe now you're considering it, reach out to Heather and get started.
Absolutely. Come my way. I'll help you.
Make it happen. Heather, thank you so much for joining me. You've certainly inspired me to figure out maybe we should have a meeting. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So that was my conversation with Heather Seasholtz. Mike, you mentioned one event that you attended recently with EO. Is there any other virtual events, either before your Zoom fatigue or even more recently, where you felt like it was worth showing up to, that you felt were really well done and something that everybody could sort of learn from?
Sure. I believe that Adobe Summit, put on by Adobe, was fantastic this spring. I even know we had a couple team members here at MKG attend sessions, and they all said it was great. Adobe Summit is massive. I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of people descend upon Las Vegas every year for this show. It is an absolute it is a circus. It's huge. Everyone wants to be there. Anyone who is anyone in, creative work, brands that do creative work, creative brands themselves, like they all want to be there. And they did a great job of picking their event up, and they moved it online. And a few things that I thought, and this is my opinion, a few things that I thought they did great were they didn't do a 6-hour running, video stream, which like nobody on earth can sit there for 6 hours and stare at a video stream. I talked about talking to Mark Cuban, great guy, really liked hearing from him. At the end of 30 minutes, I was ready to go. So you're telling me that at 31 minutes, I want to be out of there? No way in hell I go for 6 hours. And so they did a great job of breaking their sessions up. They shortened a lot of sessions. So, normally they fit into these nice 15, 30, or 60-minute time blocks, depending on what the session is. They shortened everybody's session, and all of the presenters came to play. They all said, we get it. Everyone is busy. If I actually want someone to show up and learn something here, I don't get a 30-minute block anymore. I get 17 minutes, right? And I have to be really good in 17 minutes. And a lot of their presenters were. And the other thing that was exciting about it is going online allowed them to bring some lesser known presenters on, folks who are just starting their professional speaking career, not as a professional speaker, but, they're a working digital professional. And now they're starting to do, some talks at events. And it was really cool to hear from people who weren't, the super polished people with speech coaches and, who have their lines, memorized backwards and forwards because they kind of deliver the same thing at many shows and they just tweak a little thing here and there. And I think that was very special. The other thing that I saw brands around Adobe do, right? They normally would rent a booth and have this physical presence, and they'd have after parties and all that cool stuff. I actually signed up for a company, I think it's called Bonsai, and I couldn't even tell you what they do, some sort of SaaS business, but they are known at Adobe Summit for giving out socks, like really cool socks, and they're collectibles, right? So it's like Adobe Summit 2020. So you want to get the socks every year. And it's got their logo on it. And so they said, hey, it's a bummer that Adobe Summit isn't happening. Regardless of whether you attend the session with our CEO, he was on a panel, I think. Regardless of whether you attend the session, we'll send you the socks if you're comfortable giving us your home address. And that was like a huge barrier. I remember looking at that form and saying, let me look at the terms. And I think the terms, don't quote me, but I recall them saying, we will literally only use your home address to send you socks. We're not going to use it to load into Facebook or Google Audience Manager to serve you ads. We're not going to send you direct mail at your house. You will only ever get one thing from us, and it will be a pair of socks. And I'm certain that behind the scenes, they're using that data, right, to kind of map out where their prospects are and do ideal customer profile building and segmentation. But it was just such a smart thing for them to say, like, everyone wants these things. We'll give them to you because you're not comfortable being in your office right now. And what will be interesting to see in the long run is, will they keep their word, right? Because if I get a direct mail after I get those socks, I'm going to be pissed off. And I think everybody else will too, because they clearly said, we're not going to do that. We won't market to you because this is your house. This is your personal home. Like, we're not going to.
Different.
And but they got such an incredible piece of information about anybody who signed up. Like, they got your zip code, your address, they know what city you live in, they know what county and state you live in now. And so they can match all that on the CRM on the back end. And I'm sure from a marketing standpoint, they're going bananas with all that data. So it was great to see Adobe Summit come online and get shortened and be very punchy and have great sessions. And it was fun.
And free, right? Wasn't it free?
Oh, I forgot about that. It was free because, normally Adobe Summit, just your ticket is, you're talking $1,500-$1,700 for like a day pass. And that's not even a VIP or an early entry type thing. So they totally just said it's free, no charge.
Yeah, it was great. I didn't get a chance to see everything, but I did check out some of the sessions, and Heather did a really great job of talking through. It's really cool to talk through a real life example of how a company did this. And Heather has some really great examples too. In terms of the swag, I love how they were the people who gave the socks away. I love how they were very clear on that they weren't going to use this address. If you're listening and you're like, oh man, I love that, but I really don't want to take people's addresses. That's really scary. Heather did mention a company, and I can't remember if she mentioned it online or offline. I'll be sure to get the name of it and drop it into the notes for you. But there is a company out there where you can actually set out a URL to everybody and they can request the swag, whatever they want. Socks, pens, whatever the swag might be. And then they're typing their address into that website that the company can't see. So in terms of privacy, there's that blocker as well. So there's some really great avenues to working around that Heather, some tricks she's got up her sleeve, so to speak. Mike, thanks for joining me. Thanks for your insight. I always enjoy our conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Happy listening, everybody.
If you'd like to learn more about Heather and what she's got going on over at Tully Management, be sure to check out her LinkedIn profile as well as the Tully website. Heather also gave us a bunch of links to some great assets and tools and things that she mentioned on the podcast, including the app Bible. Be sure to check that out. That's also in the notes. Thank you for listening. This is the last episode for Q2. If you'd like to make sure that you don't miss out on Q3, be sure to subscribe. As always, Thank you for listening to the MKG podcast, the podcast that helps marketers grow their businesses using the 4 M's, the right means, messaging, media, and measurement. I'm your host, Carrie Gard, and until Q3.